That time Rimuru got a daughter. By Asora09. Happiness. Third person's perspective. The stage was set. All the actors were in their positions. The orcs were slowly making their way through the vast swamp of the lizardmen. The water was proving to be a good defensive measure, effectively winning enough time for the side forced into defense to prepare countermeasures. Gelmid, Laplace, and the demon lords were all waiting for the spectacle, no, the massacre, to begin in earnest. From their viewpoint, there was no reason to feel this was a battle. To them, this was a one-sided slaughter. That's all. But who could blame them for believing such a thing? Sure, there had been some unexpected developments, such as Gabaru not being able to seize the lizardmen's throne due to the interference of a mysterious blue-haired horned individual. However, even considering such things, the difference in combat strength was too overwhelming to overlook. An army of orcs 100,000 strong that made the lizardmen's numbers pale in comparison. The ability to obtain the strength of the enemies they consumed. The blessing of having an orc lord, a rare monster, on their side. Saying that the lizardmen had a chance to win would be nothing more than mere words. Still, it's time for us to go. It's starting. There was a certain bluish-silvered individual who didn't care about the overwhelming disadvantage. No, it would be more appropriate to say that it didn't mean anything in front of him, or that he can overwhelm even such disgraceful odds. The man who had triumphed even before the one who had created this world, and now stood at his place. The one who fought adversity after adversity with an overwhelming determination, and ended up victorious. The slime who had changed the natural course of history of this world with his arrival. The ruler of monsters, and the one and only worthy of being called, the strongest. Yes, Rimuru-sama, Rimuru Tempest, was about to enter the fight. What new developments would come with his arrival? Hollow diamond, hollow diamond, hollow diamond. Rimuru's perspective. The game was starting. Or well, I guess it is a bit inappropriate to call it a game, considering lives are at stake, but, well, anyway. In less than an hour, the orc army would reach the lizardmen's stronghold, and thus the fight would begin. That's why it was important to plan ahead on this event, considering that things might go quite off track compared to the main timeline. With those thoughts in mind, I finally arrived at the lizardmen's village. I gently kicked Ronga's side to indicate to him to stop. He slowly began to reduce his speed. His fur peacefully came to a rest as his speed and the air resistance decreased. I got off from Ronga's and stood still, carefully glancing all over the scene that spread it across me. The battlefield doesn't seem any different from the main timeline. There was swamp as far as the eye could see, a flooded flatland colored in a dark shade of muddy green. It wasn't a pretty scene by any means. Rather, it gave off an eerie feeling of death, for some reason. Was it the sense of the imminent conflict drawing closer? No, that's definitely not it. Something felt off from this landscape. Something was different from last time. Although I couldn't really point out what it was. Ah, that's it. A few seconds went by before I finally pictured out the sense of my discomfort. Using my universal perception, I closely observed a hill far away in the horizon. It was nearly flat at its top, with a green carpet of grass lying over it as a soft blanket. And on top of it, a gorgeous woman stood arrogantly. She had well-proportioned limbs and refined facial figures that could only be described as breathtaking. She had her right hand over her mouth, partially covering a smug smile that went from ear to ear. Her bright silver hair was elegantly tied with a black ribbon while calmly waving around due the wind's gentle blow. Her most distinguishable feature was her eyes, one shining red as fire, and the other showing off a blue hue. She emanated confidence from her every pore, like a chess player who was certain that she would checkmate her opponent in the next move. Is it really necessary for me to point out who this woman is? This might be troublesome, but it's still within my expectations. I knew something like this was possible the moment I confined Roy in my imaginary space. Even though Luminous didn't show it on her face, her affection towards his subordinates was not to be undermined. And so, the moment I bested Roy was the moment I indirectly declared war against the Queen of Nightmares. What is she planning? Either way, she most definitely wasn't there to assume the role of a simple spectator. Rimuru-sama. As I racked my brains trying to read Luminous's plan, a voice called out to me. I turned around, noticing how the rest of my companions had finally arrived. The one who called out to me was Benimaru, dressed in his trademark red clothing. He got off from his direwolf's back with a single jump, the sword at his waist making a cackling sound. Behind him, Shion, Hakuro, and Shizusan quickly followed suit, halting their movement and dismounting their wolves. Us 5 would be the ones to participate in the battle from our side. Everybody else, namely Seal, Reilly, Veldora, and Rigurd, had stayed back to watch over the village in our absence. Leaving Seal and Rigurd aside, there was absolutely no way I would allow Reilly to take part in the bloody conflict we were about to engage in. Because, no matter how one-sided this would be due to my cheat-like strength, the amount of casualties would most definitely be non-zero. At the very least, a large part of the orc army would perish at the hand of Benimaru and the others. It was inevitable, considering their avenging wish, and the food and housing shortage the Jura forest would experience after the battle. Neither Seal nor I would expose Reilly to such bloodshed. For that simple reason, I tasked Seal with taking care of Reilly during the conflict, and she gladly accepted. She didn't even try to protest or anything. Seal might be a disaster at times. Quarreling with Veldora, rallying Reilly up to mess around with me, interrupting me at important moments, publicly embarrassing me, wanting cough, troublesome, rewards. TCH, I should stop thinking about this, because I am getting riled up. Anyway, my point is, that despite all that, Seal knows to discern moments in which it is okay to mess around, and moments in which it is not. When it comes to serious matters, she will always come up as somebody reliable. Even if the other 99% of the time she acts like a hopeless idiot. Is something the matter, Rimuru-san? Are thou all right, mine lord? Shizusan and Foltia, the latter peeking out of the former's body while in spirit form, called out to me. Thou hast a weird expression on thy face, mine lord. They sided up to my right, closely observing my facial expression. Whose fault do you think it is? Your way of talking is off. I added in my mind. Since this morning, Foltia had been using that archaic form of speech when talking with me. Why? Because. How is that possible? Mine lady Sealsama said that this is the speech thou preferred, mine lord. The one that showed most respect towards thou. You have to be mad to believe that's right. Foltia and I were going back and forth as we countered our arguments. Shizusan seemed to be getting desperate from our quarrel, as she sighed tiredly and looked up at the moon with an expression that seemed to say, what a nice night it was. Mine lord, but, shut up, I don't wanna hear it anymore. Seriously, Seal causes trouble in the weirdest ways available. Foltia, having finally given up, returned to inside Shizusan's body in her spirit form. I sighed tiredly, annoyed at Seal for teaching unnecessary things to everybody. It would be one thing if it was to Reilly, but what is she doing teaching my subordinates how to mess around with me too? How annoying. Hollow diamond, hollow diamond, hollow diamond. Achoo. Mama, are you getting a cold? Nope. It's just that your papa is talking about how much he loves me. Reilly doesn't get it, but Reilly loves mama very much too. Foo, I love you too. Come on, let's keep playing. Okay. Hollow diamond, hollow diamond, hollow diamond. Seriously, how troublesome. Benimaru sided up to me at my left as I sighed in exhaustion. The battle hadn't even begun, and I already wanted to go back home to rest. Rimuru-sama, are we waiting for something? He asked with caution. He seemed to be asking in a polite way if we were just here wasting time for no reason. No, I just thought that we could observe the battlefield for a few moments. I replied. I see, as expected of you, Rimuru-sama, Benimaru said as he switched his sight over to the swamp. There was nothing much to see, really. It's just, well, that swamp. It was a disadvantageous area to fight, but the orcs should have the same trouble as us, as long as they don't manage to get their hands on even a single lizardman, of course. But it's that precise point that brings me to the next step of my plan. We are ready on our side, Rimuru-sama. I received a message through thought communication. Great. We'll be there in a bit. Let's get going. Sue just said everything is ready on his end. Saying that, we began making our way toward the Lizardmen fortress. The plan I thought up was simple. It just consists of locking the Lizardmen up in their base. That's all. This way, the risk of the orcs gaining an advantage in water by consuming the Lizardmen would decrease significantly. In addition, as the Lizardmen would suffer no losses, we should be able to facilitate the establishment of the Jura Forest Alliance, and have the Lizardmen feel indebted toward us. Although that's all secondary, the most important thing would be that nobody would die, other than some few thousand orcs. That being said, this strategy also had quite the risks. The most obvious would be the burden that each one of us fighting would have to carry. It is an army 100,000 strong against 5 individuals, after all. However, that was still only a minor inconvenience, as each one of us should be enough to handle a large number of orcs by ourselves. That, and the fact that we don't actually have to kill the 100,000 orcs, but rather just one, the Orc Lord. The problem comes with the second demerit, which would be the fact that we would be revealing our overwhelming strength in front of the demon lords that are spectating. If they saw us completely overwhelm the orcs, which should be unstoppable by this point, we would force most of the demon lords into defense. That in itself is not a demerit, as making them more cautious would keep them from making reckless, aggressive attacks. However, that same caution could drive them into forming alliances, which is something I would prefer to avoid if possible. Milam and Guy wouldn't do that, of course, they are supposed to be the strongest demon lords, after all. But the possibility existed with the weaker ones, like Carolon, Frey, Ramirez, and Clayman. Not to mention that this time Luminous is also present in the game. It would be possible to fend them off with brute strength if they actually do ally, but I would like to avoid a situation in which Tempest is attacked by all sides simultaneously. More so considering Tempest is nowhere near its prime. Thus, this is a high-risk, high-return strategy. Though, of course, this could only be done with the permission of the Lizardmen. If they prefer to go ahead and fight for their honor or whatever, they are free to do so. Yeah, I am not as bold as to confine an entire race to house arrest. Or so I thought, at least. Rimuru no. Explain what's going on. The first thing I saw as I arrived at the Lizardmen fortress was a massive cluster of lizardmen inside the throne room. The throne room was huge, but with so many people inside, it seemed perhaps even too small. I would like to add that it seemed the space in the room had been correctly assigned to maximize the amount of people inside it. It would be perfect except for a tiny little detail. Why are they all tied up? I turned to look at Sue in shock. He was standing with his back glued to one of the pillars in the room. He had both of his hands raised near his face, from which I could see countless small, white strings tied carefully around his fingers and around the strings themselves. It was clear what those strings were holding in place. Worry not, Rimuru-sama. My strings are set to non-lethal. They don't have modes. No, wait, that's not it. Why are they tied up? Everyone behind me seemed to have the same expression, confusion. And in front of me, all of the lizardmen were terrified to death. I could even see some who seemed to have fainted from the shock. This is bad, this could worsen our relation with the Lizardmen village. I began sweating profusely as I looked at Sue, who seemed to be the most calm person in the entire world at this moment. Rimuru-sama, you said, we should keep them from going out, in order to prevent deaths among them, is what the full phrase was. They want to lock us inside to use us as sacrifices to the orcs. A trapped lizardman woman yelled as she tried to free herself. No, wait. This is a misunderstanding. And then, Rimuru-sama, you said, Sue, go and protect them so we gain their trust, to then form a formal alliance with them later on. They are trying to deceive USSSS. Another scream echoed through the room. Why you're wrong. Rimuru-sama, don't you remember you said, and Sue, if anybody tries to rebel, be sure to immediately end it. End their plans of taking the throne of the Lizardmen. And that was referring to Gabiru. He said he's gonna end us if we rebel. Tu didn't say that. This is seriously getting out of control. Who the hell do these Lizardmen take me for? Am I nothing more than a tyrant in their eyes? And then, Rimuru-sama, you said. You just shut up. I immediately silenced Sue with a string similar to his own, tying it vertically around his head to prevent him from opening his mouth even a single inch. I could see with universal perception that most people in the room were in a panic. No, I didn't even need that to notice it. The only one who remained the most calm was the Lizardman chief, who was only looking at me with pity. Don't think I want to be pitied. I just want the troublemakers to stop appearing. Everyone, silence. In a single loud shout from the chief, everybody stopped talking and turned to look at him. But, chief, we are going to be. I said silence. I will permit no bad-mouthing toward our allies. But chief, he said. I said silence. Why do I have to repeat myself? The room completely fell into silence as the chief countered back any protest that threatened with rising to the surface. He sighed in annoyance as he finally managed to silence everyone, even those who had been misled by Sue's declarations. Very well. Rimuru, I would appreciate it if you could please explain this situation, the chief said as he looked down at his own bindings. I guess it would be rude to talk like this. Sue, unbind the chief, I said as I turned to look Sue in the eyes. He didn't say anything, so I guess he had nothing to protest. Finally, about 10 seconds later, the chief was now free, as he massaged the parts of his arms and legs that had been restrained by Sue's strings. This is a misunderstanding, chief. I swear. I desperately tried to explain myself to the chief, who had a very dubious expression on his face. After that, there was an hour of explaining and apologizing on my end. Of course, the lizardmen were all released. Hollow diamond, hollow diamond, hollow diamond. Lewis's perspective. My name is Louis Valentine. I am nothing more than a mere servant. A servant of my mistress, Luminu-sama. As such, there is no reason for me to explain anything relevant about myself. When arriving at an elegant palace, do you ask for information about the manners, history, and personality of the maids and butlers? Of course not. For us followers, unimportant people, there are only two elements which matter. Our loyalty and our proficiency in carrying out orders. Without those two elements, we are useless in all aspects of this world. For us who stand at the lowest in the hierarchy, those two are our blade. Would you use a sword with no blade? Of course not. As such, the only option we have, that I have, is to follow orders, in order to be useful to my mistress, who means everything to me who has nothing. Thinking about such things, I slowly approach my target. I will not fail. For if I fail, then my blade will dull. And if my blade loses worth, nothing will remain. That is the determination that I, Louis Valentine, reinforce as I carry out the orders Luminu-sama gave me. Hollow diamond, hollow diamond, hollow diamond. Rimuru's perspective. Even after an hour of explaining and apologizing, the chief still seemed to have his doubts regarding my strategy. He was not worried about being betrayed by us or anything like that, but rather by the fact that this swamp, the battlefield, was the home of the lizardmen. Just as I had predicted, their pride was getting in the way. If their territory was being threatened, they would not allow themselves to hole up inside as outsiders fought their war. We cannot let you guys control our battle, the chief said resolutely. I could see how many of the other lizardmen present in the room were nodding with their heads, their faces full of determination. I understand your way of thinking, but you are wrong. I raised my voice to emphasize my point. All of the lizardmen, even the chief, looked at me in bewilderment, as if they hadn't expected my change. This is not your battle. Everyone in the room looked at me with their eyes as wide as saucers. Even Benimaru and the others who arrived with me, and Sue who still had his mouth tied up. I guess most of them were thinking I would reply with something like, we can't just let you guys walk to your deaths. Or even beg him to reconsider his choice. However, I decided to choose a very specific set of words. This is not your battle. Because in fact, it isn't. I don't remember saying even once, that this battle was for the territory of the lizardmen. Nor did I say this battle was for the sake of the lizardman race itself. No, I did not. Because that is not the truth. This is a war for the Jura forest, I said as I looked around at the people in the room. If we do not stop them here, the entire forest will fall, and all of its races will be taken for the ride. I noticed how the chief's eyes widened even more, though it was a change only I was able to notice due to how slight the change had been. Don't misunderstand, this is not a battle for your race, or your territory. It is a battle for the survival of a whole ecosystem. Those were rough words, I am aware of it, but I had to clearly state my point here if I wanted things to go as I planned. The chief listened closely without openly criticizing me, but I could already see several lizardmen glaring strongly at me. I will not allow you to throw away the survival of this forest for something as useless as pride. Sure, pride helps one stay within the acceptable bounds as an individual, but once it gets in the way of something you have to do, it becomes nothing more than dead weight. The chief, and every other lizardman in the room remained in silence. They had nothing to say against my argument. They seemed to understand that there was even more at stake than their own survival. Are you truly serious? I didn't have to ask what the chief meant by that question. It wasn't a question about whether I was right about this battle not belonging to the lizardmen, or about if I really intended to march out there with only my people. Will you really stop us from participating? That was what the chief was trying to ask as he stared directly into my eyes, perhaps intending to read my real intentions. If I lied here, he would probably notice. Of course. That was all I said as I returned his gaze with one of my own. Even if I have to force them to, they are not leaving this place at all. Fine. The chief sighed tiredly as he broke eye contact. In an instant, countless voices of the lizardmen echoed through the room. Of course, they were not voices of approval and agreement, but of rejection and protest. They weren't happy with how the chief bowed backwards in front of me. Silence. The chief shouted loudly, forcing everyone to quiet up. We cannot fight against the orcs by ourselves, and the only allies we have are Rimuru and his followers. He paused for a second to observe the state of the lizardmen in the room. Deeming it acceptable, he continued. Many of you observed my fight with him not so long ago. And if you are one of them, you should know that if Rimuru wants to keep us from fighting, he has enough power to do it. Quote. Following those words, many lizardmen casted their gaze downward. They knew what the chief had said was right. They had also surely experienced Sue's force. There was no way they could win against us in this world where quantity means nothing in front of quality. That settles it, then. Deeming nobody would raise any further protests, I declared this conversation over. Now, it was time to set everything up. Hollow diamond, hollow diamond, hollow diamond. Seely's perspective. Mama, meanie, really pouted as she looked at me with eyes that were hurting my poor heart. Not that I deserved it, of course. Checkmate. Oh, I won again. How very surprising. It seems I am completely dominating in this series of games of chess. Who would have thought? Mama, you cheater. How could you say that? I am winning fairly. Papa said Mama was a cheater in games that used calculations. Oh, look at her, trying to say words that are hard to say. I want to eat her up. It's calculations, honey. I began putting the pieces on the board in their original positions as I closely watched how Riley was racking her brain trying to understand how calculations is said. She thought about it for a few seconds with her mouth open and looking upward, but it seemed she didn't get it. Quote. That thing. You cheat, Mama. Well, I guess you could say I am cheating. Technically. Due to the amazing calculating powers that surpass those of even a supercomputer back on Earth, I can always determine the best move to make in this game. It is surprisingly easy to memorize the 10-120 different states of the board, you know. Oh, you didn't. You should give it a try, someday. No, I am sure Mama is the only one who can do that. Oh, look at you. You are already learning Mama's special mind read. Cough. Nothing, I said nothing. What are you looking at? I said nothing. Mama is fighting with nobody. Don't mind it, honey. You'll understand someday the worth of the battles with oneself. Cuckoo, I am so cool, aren't I? No, Mama is cheating against me, she's not cool. I ignored Riley's hurtful comment and instead finished setting up the chessboard once again. This process had already repeated itself 3 times, all of them due to my victory. I am quite surprised Riley hasn't given up yet, to be honest. She was the one who said she wanted to play the game with the horse and the towers, maybe that has something to do. She can't quit because she was the one who wanted to play. Honey, want to play again? I already knew the answer, but decided to ask anyway. How do I know, you say? Well, that's because she is mine and Rimuru's daughter, after all. The daughter between the slime who rules the monsters and the skill who gained conscience would never. Yes, give up. Riley brought a hand to her chin and sat cross-legged as she thought about which would be the best opening move. I smiled as I saw her nod energetically after she decided the right move to make. Since she would be opening, using the white pieces, that means I would have the opportunity to rule over the dark side. What? It is a good reference. It was an opportunity I couldn't let go, you know. Og. I couldn't help myself, I am sure. Mama, nobody said anything. She might be right about that. But it is hard to know, you know. This communication is one-sided, after all. But it certainly is a good way to pass time. I would honestly prefer to mess around with my hubby, but he's been a bit too alert lately. I wonder if he already noticed Foltia's new way of speaking. It might appear that I fool around a bit too much, and perhaps I do, but well, I think that for a relationship to work, there has to be 2 types of people, a fool and a serious one. But, the problem with my hubby and I is that we can both play any one of those roles anytime, so he doesn't understand that the more stiff he acts, the more I want to play around with him. Don't tell him, Kay. This will be our little secret. Mama, your turn. I broke my line of thought and looked up to see Riley's face. She was eagerly waiting for me to make my move with a confident face. "Ah, I got an idea, let's mess around with her for a bit." There. I made my move after showing my thinking gesture for a moment. Riley, who had a face as though she had predicted my move, immediately made her own, a smug smile appearing on her face. Where did she get that smug smile from, I wonder? Is there someone who is being a bad influence to my daughter? If that's the case, then drastic measures might be required, nothing serious, of course. Perhaps just a slight level of intimidation and coercion might work, if not maybe a bit of torture, cough cough, as I was saying, nothing too extreme. What's wrong? I made my move, but when I looked at Riley's face she was looking at me as if she was scared of something. Hog. Did somebody scare her? Perhaps drastic measures really are required. I began to heavily ponder who could be behind all this disaster regarding Riley. Whoever it is, they really have to pay for their sins. Mama, but it's you. Nothing. That's weird. I heard her say something, but well, if she says it's nothing, then so be it. Anyway, Riley had now made her next turn and recovered her smug smile. She crossed her arms and looked at me directly into my eyes. Her purple eyes seemed to say, "Hey, Mama is gonna lose." She seemed awfully confident in her claim. With that determination, perhaps she would be able to beat me this time. I made my next move, effectively falling into the trap she had just planted. Riley's smile widened as she seemed to sense her victory was approaching. She raised her right hand to the sky, and then brought it back to the board with a smack. She clutched one of her pieces with all of her might, and made her next move. Her smile of absolute victory intensified as she readied up to proclaim her victory over her totally beautiful, awesome, and cool mama. Ha. Checkma, At that moment, though, she noticed something was amiss. She noticed that despite that last move had, indeed, left me in a check, it wasn't yet a checkmate. And that, in fact, with a single move, I was able to both defend against her offense, and make a counter-attack at her own pieces. Checkmate, I said as I declared my victory once again. Wah, really didn't seem to understand what happened. She moved her gaze from the board to me over and over again in disbelief. She must have noticed by this point that I had intentionally driven the game to this very ending. I would have been able to win normally too, but I wanted to see that confident face of hers. She looked so cool. She looked so confident in herself that I wanted to hug her mid-game. As she came to terms with it, Riley slowly opened her mouth. Mama you chiater rrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr might have overdone it. Honey. 2, sorry, I said as I approached her side and hugged her. No, Mama meanie, she replied. Her voice sounded mad, but she didn't try to oppose my hug or anything like that. Could it be that she just wants to be spoiled for a bit? I mean, Rimuru and I have been a bit busy with everything regarding the orcs and things like that. Did she perhaps feel lonely? I'm sorry I didn't notice earlier. I am still too new to this whole mothering thing. I said, a bit embarrassed. It hasn't been too much time since Riley arrived at our side, and I am still quite lacking in every aspect that involves being a mother. Am I doing things right? Am I being good enough? Those types of questions have flooded my mind ever since I took on the job of being Riley's mother. The anxiety generated by those questions is quite the load to carry every day, especially for someone like me who has only just recently understood how it felt to be anxious. Riley, too might be new at this, but I'll do my best. I looked down at Riley as she looked up at me. No, Riley smiled directly at me as she closed her eyes cutely. Did she just deny my determination to be a better mother? What? No, this isn't supposed to go like this, alright. Is she perhaps still mad because I won at chess? No. But going as far as denying my motherhood because of that? No. Is it because I'm a mess most of the time? Am I not good enough for her? Does she prefer to have a secondary heroine who only appears in a chapter and T-Hendies as her mama? I am not panicking. You're panicking. Mama has always been good. From the start. Riley finished her sentence with a gentle smile and hugged me tighter. My mama is strong, and beautiful, and smart, and very cool. You're the best mama in the wool world. There's no other mama I would ever like. Quote. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there in silence, hugging my daughter close to my chest. There were probably no words for what I was feeling right now. Joy, happiness, bliss, delight, elation, wait, no, all of those mean the same thing. But it doesn't matter. I am happy. There is a word to describe how I feel. Quote. Mama, you, Kay, really called out to me worryingly. That's when I noticed tears had begun forming in the corner of my eyes. I am crying. No, it's different from normal crying. Is this what they call crying of joy? Maybe. I see. It really is an interesting thing. Quote. Mama's okay. She's just so very happy about what you said. I cleaned the pools in my eyes with my hands, one at a time, to keep the other gently stroking Riley's fired hair. Mama is very proud of you, you know. You're the best girl I could have ever asked for. I smiled at her and gave her a kiss on her head. I could feel how her face turned up into a smile on my chest. Quote. I gave Riley one last hug and gave her a pat on her back before separating myself from her for a second. I looked her in the eyes. Mama is going to be a bit busy for a second, Kay. Be a good girl and wait for me inside, Kay. Riley tilted her head curiously for a second, but then just nodded while smiling. After that, Riley disappeared into thin air. Or rather, I placed her into the imaginary space. Quote. I appreciate you waiting, but I can't really say I condone eavesdropping as a hobby. Quote. I do apologize for that matter. I was not expecting to listen into such a heartfelt conversation. A figure appeared from among the trees with an apologetic expression. I had seen him before, though not in this timeline, of course. He had blonde hair and a pair of sharp teeth on his mouth. Oh, do allow me to introduce myself. My name is Louis Valentine, a faithful servant of my mistress Luminusama. How interesting. In that case, I guess I should introduce myself as well. I said before adopting a more appropriate posture, completely standing up and slightly brushing the dust off my by now characteristic silver hoodie. I am Seal Tempest, a proud mother, wife, and someone who's very pissed off after being interrupted while having a moment with her daughter. After that, both of them disappeared from the face of the world.